Hello and welcome to this 11th episode of our new Swift MUD tutorial series where we're creating a multi-user dungeon game using the Swift programming language and the NIO framework. And today we're going to expand on what we did during the last session. During the last episode we implemented a say or speak command that lets players speak out loud, which means that everyone in the room will hear what they're saying. We will now add functionality to let a player whisper something to another player and only the other player will be able to hear it. So that's slightly more complicated than the last case, but it should still be very usable. So what we first need again is we need a verb that will implement our whisper command. So let's call it, we'll add a case whisper, and we'll have a target username string, that's what the person we're going to speak to, and a message string. And this one will require at least three words, because we need the word whisper itself, we need an intended user name, and we need at least a message 1 word long. So trying to get this implemented is pretty similar to the say command, but instead we'll add for the additional username that's added, so we'll create a whisper, and the target username will be the second word in the parts array. And for the message we'll do something similar to the last one, however we'll do the parts, drop first, and now we'll drop the first two, it's also an option, and join them again using a space. So again we'll create a new helper function. We have here a say message function. Sorry, we need a new whisper a message function. Now again we need to say to a target player name, we'll have a message, and we'll have a session, and it'll be an asynchronous function that returns an array of MUD responses. And the first thing we need to do is the same as before, we need to get our player. But now we also need to get our target player. So we'll try and find one. We'll have a target player. And this will be a user. Do we have a find for user ID? We do have a filter, I think, where the username equals the username that was sent in. Else we'll return a MUD response array that just says there is no player in the room. This is in the game because we're not checking on the room yet. And this returns, a filter returns an array. We'll just get the first one. Then we need to check whether the player dot current room ID equals the target player dot current room ID. Else we'll say return, just copy paste this, there is no, we should say something like you can only whisper to other players in the room, finally, we also need to have a player session for the target player, because the player needs to be logged in. So we'll have a session storage, and we'll take the first one where we can find the player ID equals the target player dot this should be a user, and this should be target player dot player ID, else we'll return another message saying you can only whisper to players that are logged in. It has an ID, I think. Okay, so now we can we have all the data that we need. We can start constructing the result. We have a result. It will be an array of MUD responses, and the first one will be for ourselves, and the message will be you whisper to target player name a message. Then we will take our result and append a new element, a MUD response for our target player. So we'll take as a session the target player session, and the message will be player.username and whispers to you and the message. And for all the other players in the room, we need to find all the players in the room. Let's see. The players in the room equals user.filter, where the current room ID equals player.current room ID. And then we need to make sure that for each player in the room, so we'll have our players in room. This also contains the other player and the player itself. So what we'll do is we'll loop over them, and for each other player we'll test if the other player.id is not the same as the player.id and the other player.id is not the same as the target player.id, then we will see if we can find a session for that player. So we'll have another session equals session storage. But first, where our player.id equals the other player.id. So now we have a session for the player. Then we'll add to our results array a new MUD response in the other session, and we'll say that the player.username whispers something to the target player name, but you can't quite make out what is said, something like this. And finally return our results. So that's a lot of code, but this should give us back an array of all the messages that we need. Then we go to our parse handler and add for this case. So we'll have a case whisper that gets us a target name and a message. And we'll have a response that will be an await whisper message to target username, and the message will be message, and the session will be the updated session. And this should work. So let's try and run this one. Okay, let's see if we can start whispering something. Yep. Oh, our application didn't shut down correctly the last time. So we need to do, unfortunately sometimes you need to do our kill trick. And then we need to find the process ID. And now it should run. Can telnet into it. We log in as our test user. And we log in as our first user, and we can whisper something to our test user. How are you doing? Okay, we think we need a third player to see what happens for the other players. So we'll telnet into our local host. We'll create a user, test user 2. And now we need to, unfortunately, first hack our array a bit to make sure that the user, that player is in the same room. So we'll take this file and we'll say let's see, we have our username. This is our room, and we have a test user 2, and we'll add to this user a current room. Let's see whether this works. So we'll log in as our new test user. We'll log in as our first user, and we'll log in as our third user. Yep. And now we should be able to whisper something to our test user 2. And the test user correctly receives this message. We say what we say, and the third user does notice something is being said, but you can't hear what is being said. So this seems to be working quite well. Let's close these sessions. And that means I think we met our goal for this episode. We're able to whisper something to another player. I think from a functionality point of view, that's as far as we're going to go. In the next episode, we'll conclude the series and we'll look what kind of improvements can be made from here. Thanks for watching and have a good day.